Our final session with the New Year, New Approaches to Anxiety series, learning series with Hala Khoury. And today's session is practice, reflection, and intention setting around all the past sessions that we've done with Hala.
Thank you so much, Ingrid. Hi, everybody. I'll fill some stuff in. So if you were not here in that last session, you should still be fine. Briefly, for those of you who are new to me, my training is in counseling psychology and community psychology. I've been doing a lot of work in private practice as well as with system impacted youth. I'm a trauma specialist. I also teach yoga, and I'm a social justice activist. So I work with a lot of activist organizations as well, helping them develop and build cultures of care within their organizations. And I've spent the last 6 or 7 years working with folks like you, direct service providers, teachers, therapists, gang interventionists, social workers, supporting you all to find a way to be sustainable in your own work, as well as develop a trauma-informed lens for delivery. I'm originally from Beirut, Lebanon, moved here when I was 3 years old. So today is really a wrap up of the last 3 sessions. Again, no worries if you weren't here, because I still think you'll get a bunch out of it, but trying to put some of this stuff into practice. And so, our first session together, the first 2 sessions were really this framework of trauma and resilience, understanding the workings of our nervous system. We did a lot of work with grounding practices, centering practices, breath practices, because our body is our GPS, it's our instrument, right? And so how do we work with that instrument? How do we know? It's almost like looking under the hood of your car, which I know nothing about cars. So this is a terrible analogy because I don't know how my car works, but it still does because I take it to people. But if you break down, you need to understand some basics of how to change a tire, what's going on in the car. This is like looking under our own hood, right? Because we can't just take ourselves to the shop. Sometimes we can. So understanding how our nervous system works and tools to settle and manage our nervous system, right? And then we moved into relationships because we are relational beings, right? So we can't just fix our anxiety by ourselves. We need support. And sometimes the source of our anxiety is relational. And so how do we also allow our relationships to be a source of healing for us, right? So that's what we're going to talk about today. Is we did that in the 3rd session. We talked about relationships. We looked at power in relationships. We talked about boundaries, and we started to talk about communication. So in today's session, we're actually going to complete that piece. So today we have 3 goals. We're going to practice some of these communication tools in small groups. And this is going to be a bulk of what we do together. And then we're going to transition into, okay, what are some of your personal goals for releasing stress, for managing anxieties, for building resilience? And create a really manageable action plan. So if y'all have been here with me, I'm all about keep your standards really low, set goals that are totally attainable so you can feel successful at it all the time, right? Because we are busy, we're caring for a lot of people, we're in the midst of a pandemic. I don't know how many of us are going to get to the spot, right? So this is about what are the things we can do daily that don't take a lot of time, that can help us feel regulated in our systems, okay? So my hope is you walk away with some, really practical stuff today. So I want to launch us with this one quote from Bessel van der Kolk, who's a trauma specialist who wrote a really great book called The Body Keeps the Score. Because I want to start with, how does this connect to anxiety, right? Why are we doing communication practices in a workshop that's about, being okay and our own self-care? And he says that being able to feel safe with other people is probably the single most important aspect of mental health. Safe connections are fundamental to meaningful and satisfying lives. Right? So the ways that we are with each other, having relationships that feel safe, being mirrored and seen is really, really important. And so this concept of attunement, right, that we are social beings, and when we are not attuned to, it can cause us a lot of anxiety. And in a minute, I'm going to show you a video it's called the still face experiment, and it's with a mother and a child. And it's going to show the impact of what happens when we're not mirrored. Okay. Now, we are not babies, and we're not going to like cry and have a temper tantrum if somebody isn't exactly mirroring us. But this video is going to show you really at our core what humans need, right? Without any filters and with this infant brain, this idea that attunement allows us to settle. And I felt moved to share it with you all. It's only 2 minutes long, just to give us a little bit of an embodied experience. So I'm going to go ahead and share this video, and I hope the sound comes out okay. You can just alert me if the sound doesn't.
The still face experiment, what the mother did was she sits down and she's playing with her baby who's about a year of age.
I'm like, girl. Oh.
And she gives a greeting to the baby gives a greeting back to her.
Yeah.
This baby starts pointing at different places in the world, and the mother's trying to engage her and play with her. They're working to coordinate their emotions and their intentions, what they want to do in the world. And that's really what the baby is used to. And then we ask the mother to not respond to the baby. The baby very quickly picks up on this. And then she uses all of her abilities to try and get the mother back. She smiles at the mother. She points because she's used to the mother looking where she points. The baby puts both hands up in front of her and says, "What's happening here?" She makes that screechy sound at the mother, like, "Come on, why aren't we doing this?" Even in this 2 minutes, when they don't get the normal reaction, they react with negative emotions. They turn away. They feel the stress of it. They actually may lose control of their posture because of the stress that they're experiencing.
I'm here. And what are you doing? Oh, yes. Oh, what a big girl.
It's a little like the good, the bad, and the ugly.
So are folks familiar with that video? Yeah. So, what I find so poignant, every time I watch it, I feel it in my body. I don't know if any of you do, right? That, what's happening to our kids with masks, right? Right. So this attunement is so, so important, right? And you make such a good point, right? I've been working with teachers here in Los Angeles who are, this one lovely teacher, a second grade teacher, said that he's learning to use his arms more and highlight his eyes more, right? So that his students can see his affect, right? But absolutely the masks are impacting attunement of teachers and their students. And I know a lot of you are working with teachers, right? And this is a different conversation, right? So, I can feel it in my own body, right? So for now, we're focusing on attunement in adult relationships, although 100%, right? How are we supporting those of you working with teachers or those of you who are educators? How can we attune without those facial expressions while we have masks? And I'm very happy to go there in the conversation as well, because I've been brainstorming with some of these teachers, ways to attune with their arms, ways once the surge goes down to spend a certain amount of time outside, making sure you can have your masks off for a while, where you can do some of that attunement, and then you go inside and put the masks on, right? So I think teachers are having to get creative about that. And 100%, I think that's why there's one addition to increased anxiety, right, in the classroom and for teachers, right? And I know we have educators on here as well as school psychologists and administrators. So, check your own bodies, right? Like, we're like that baby, like, I want to be attuned to, right? And, as we develop and as we grow, what should happen is we should be able to tolerate less and less attunement, right? Like, it would be very awkward if you're talking to another adult and you're like, "Hi, how are you doing?" Right? Like, that's awkward, right? And we're going to be when we don't have relationships where we feel seen and safe and attuned to, that's going to increase our anxiety, right? It's going to make us feel anxious. And we all need spaces for that. So, what we're going to talk about right now is, how do we do that? How can we create more attunement in our relationships, and not just our personal relationships, but also our work relationships, as well as our therapeutic relationships. Now, I cannot give you a workshop on how to get attuned to by other people, because we can't control other people. So what we're going to talk about is, how do we offer the mirroring and attunement to others, right? For a couple of reasons. A, to de-escalate if there's conflict, whether it's conflict with a peer or a child that is not able to listen or is being defiant, right? Or conflict with a loved one. Attunement can create an environment for mutuality and for listening, okay? So we're going to talk about what I like to call the 4 R's of resilient communication. Is how do we build this relationship how do we build this resilience in our relationships? Because we can't just build resilience individually, right? So we've talked about this hyper individualism that says, well, you should be good on your own, just like, the way that individualism has infiltrated self-help, right? Like, do a lot of therapy, eat healthy, drink a lot of water, and you should be fine. Well, no, we're relational beings, right? We need to be surrounded by a few relationships where there's like really healthy attunement, right? So we're going to talk about, how do we give that attunement as a way to get it as well, okay? So the 4 R's of a resilient relationship. So first is, of resilient communication, first is reflection. We have to understand what's happening inside of us, right? If I'm talking to somebody and my heart is racing and I'm angry and I just really want to rip their head off, right? I have to be aware of that, because pretty much anything I say or do is going to reflect that, right? So first we have to understand what is happening inside of me in this communication, right? Just like we started today with, what are you feeling right now? Right? Because if we don't know what's going on inside of us, guess what? The person we're talking to is going to feel it. Okay. Even if we're saying the words, if the feeling is there and we're not managing that feeling, right? So we have to acknowledge what's happening inside of us. Then we can use these self-regulation tools to regulate. Like, all right, I'm going to get grounded. I'm going to breathe. I'm going to figure out how to regulate enough to be able to engage with you. And then I'm going to find ways to build a bridge to relate, right? We're going to go through this today. Listen, mirror, ask clarifying questions, right? So these are just the steps we take to be able to have communication, right? And then, of course, I put in repair, because we're going to mess it up all the time. We're human, right? We're going to yell, or we're not going to say the right thing, or we're going to be judgmental. And then we're going to take accountability and forgive. Okay, so this is the framework that I want to work with. And it's a framework that I think that I hold in a lot of my communications. And it's been a really great guiding light. I mess it up all the time, but I've gotten good at repair and asking for forgiveness, right? and I'll give you all an example, right? I'm going to give you a very real life example from the perspective of being a parent, right? So I work with teachers, I work with educators, and I'm often thinking about that view. And I'm also the parent of an anxious child in the midst of a pandemic, right? Trying to be skillful in my communications. And last week I had some stress because our school put the class on Zoom because they're following the old CDC guidelines, right? So if somebody tests positive, everybody's in Zoom. And my kid is struggling with some serious separation anxiety. And part of his therapy is having to go to school every day to help retrain his brain to not be anxious. And every time we're on Zoom school, his mental health suffers because he backtracks in his capacity to hold the separation anxiety, right? So we're on Zoom now. It's like, 3 days one week, 2 days the following week, right? And then they tell me I didn't get my PCR test in time, so my kid can't come to school the next day because they sent an unclear communication. Now, I'm triggered because I'm really worried about my kid, right? And so I can feel the fight or flight, the anger, the rage, right? And I'm sitting there going, do not send the email now, Hala, right? This is not the time to communicate because you're on fire inside, right? So first thing I have to do is reflect what's happening to me. I'm scared. I'm worried about my kid. I'm really mad at the school, right? All those really primal emotions, and I let myself feel them, right? I even called the girlfriend. I was like, can you fucking believe it? Blah, you know, I'm not supposed to cuss, sorry. Can you believe it? And I let myself have my primal response, right? And then I asked myself to breathe and regulate, right? I gave myself space to have my feelings first, right? And then I like breathed and regulated, and I could really also feel, look, they have no choice. I know how overwhelmed teachers are right now. I don't want to add to their overwhelm. They've been doing amazing. They're so supportive. I could feel the other part of what's true, right? I'm worried about my kid. And for the most part, very, very grateful for the school. And then I sent a communication, right? And I sent a communication first offering them mirroring. I can't imagine how stressful this is for you, right? I'm so grateful, right? Trying to mirror what I suspect might be going on, right? And I just need to let you know how stressful this is for me. I wish you could follow the old guidelines. I want to give you this feedback so you know what's happening in the community. And then I ended with, I know it's out of your hands, but please let me know what I can do to get my kid at school, right? Now, I did like a 90% good job. And for sure there was some emotion, right? Because I'm human, right? I'm not a robot, right? And I sent the communication, and then I got a communication back saying, please don't send us emails when you're triggered. And I was like, that triggered me even more, right? Because I'm like, I teach this stuff. I like did all the things, right? I grounded and I breathed and I mirrored, right? I did all the things. But it didn't mean it was going to be received that way, because who's receiving that probably got 20 other really angry, unskillful emails, right? Because I'm thinking, I know other parents are upset, and I know I am probably sending the most skillful email around it, because other people are not necessarily to have the tools I have, right? And I know other parents who sent emails, and I then did the same thing, like like my ego too, right? Like, I teach this stuff, like she should see how skillful that email was, la la la, right? Did the same thing, and then again tried to really think about, I was probably one of 20 emails, right? Many were probably blaming. And in the nervous system of the person who read it, even though I delivered it skillfully, in my opinion, it's not going to be received that way, right? I mean, I don't know if you've ever done this, but like when I'm pissed, it's like, it's hard for me to really see if somebody is actually giving me what I want. It can take a minute, right? And so I was like, all right, this is such a great learning opportunity, right? And so I responded again with, I'm sure you've gotten a bunch of these angry communications. I hate to add to your stress. And I said, I reviewed all the emails I sent. And I said, I don't think I would change a thing. I feel like I was generous and thoughtful. And I said to her, I really need you to allow me my humanity. I'm not going to do this perfectly right. And I really would hope, if I wasn't 100% skillful in my communication, that you would allow me some space for my humanity, just like I want to do the same for you, And then I got back a response saying, I'm so sorry, you're right. We're just really stressed. And I said, I get it, right? And it was a very effortful communication, but it felt like I was like, ooh, this is such a teaching moment and actually the administrator I was communicating to is somebody I deeply respect and I know has this skill set, right? So we were able to try to offer each other this sort of forgiveness, right? We did a repair and a lot of mirroring. And then her email back to me had a lot of mirroring. Like I didn't hear how worried you are about your child. I hear it now, right? So I'm hoping that a little bit just brings to life some of these concepts. It's very alive for me because I just had it, right? And we're never going to communicate perfectly, but how do we build cultures within the people that we're in relationship with where we don't have to be perfect, where part of it is, oh God, I said it and I was really stressed out and I can see that I had energy or I actually don't think I had energy, but I understand why you would read it that way. So much of our communication is happening via email now that we're not hearing people's tone or seeing their body language. And so we can misread it. We can project, right? And I actually told myself that if my second email was not received well, I would just request a phone call or a Zoom so we could see each other, right? Because when we don't see each other, it can get very, very messy. So I just want to pause for a moment, just hear from folks. Like, are you having some messy communications? What are some of the factors that are showing up for you? Anything that folks want to share, just to know what else might be present for you all in terms of like seeing how when we don't see each other, our anxiety goes up, and how it's hard to see each other when we're both anxious.
Yeah.
I love that you were like, oh yeah, that's me. I'm like you. I can be impulsive, right? And I can act, and then I have to be like, oh gosh, I totally just did that again. Yeah. Yeah. And I've gotten to the point now where I will say that to folks. If I'm collaborating with new people, I'll say to them, I tend to do this. So just please know you can call me on it. If you think I'm like just acting without checking in with you, it's something I'm working on. I give them the heads up. And I love, there's this author, Mia Mingus. She writes about running towards accountability. Like if everybody was just running towards accountability, you know, just like, oh my God, I totally just did that, right? It often softens the other person from being defensive and wanting to blame. They might reflect on their own accountability, right? And that can really quicken repair, right? When we're not afraid of taking accountability. So it's beautiful that you did that. Yeah, emails get very misunderstood, right? Even if we do all the right words, right? And social media, of course, oh my gosh, it is such a hub for misinformation, right? And then somebody else is saying that when you're anxious, you get defensive. Exactly. Absolutely. So, you know, when we're dysregulated, it's very hard to feel or experience or hear nuance, right? We get very binary in our thinking when we're anxious. When the alarm bells are going on, we're either safe or not safe. People are good or bad, right? And this is happening in our world right now where everything is so polarized, right? It's so polarized. Somebody else is sharing, realizing that a remark from a member I experienced as a microaggression last month shut me down, right? In a media club that I'm part of. And I felt robbed of my participation. Yeah. Oof, that's intense, right? And how often do we also override things, right? Because it's normalized or we're just used to those microaggressions that our nervous system just even numbs us out to them because it's part of our survival, right? But then as you're describing, you shut down, right? Some places in your life where you can practice some of this mirroring and active listening. Actually, let me put this down and give you a little bit more framing, right? So this idea that I can't tell you how to make other people do the mirroring, but we can do it, right? We can do it to change the tone. We can do it to shift the dynamic. And so it's not always appropriate, right? Like if you're unsafe, you're not going to stick around to mirror and actively listen to somebody, right? If somebody wants to cause you harm, right? I want you to think about relationships where either you have to stay because it's somebody that's in your life, right? Or where you do think it would be beneficial to try to figure out how to allow yourself to practice this attunement, this mirroring, this active listening. So I will remind you from our last session, let me pull up the slide because not everybody was here, that active listening is about letting somebody know you hear them. So it's communicating verbally and non-verbally. I hear you, I see you, I don't judge you, and I'm curious about your perspective and your experience, okay? This does not mean you agree with them, right? I talked about my kid having all these unrealistic needs when they were like 4 or 5, and, you know, me having to mirror back, like, you really want to bring, you know, the juicer into your bed, but that's not okay, right? But first we want to mirror where somebody is at before we can sort of offer whatever intervention needs to happen, right? When we're mirroring somebody, we're not giving them advice, we're not judging, we're not analyzing, we're not sympathizing. We're just trying to let them know we heard them. So that's kind of like when I got the email from the school, my feeling was, F you, like you're following the old guidelines, my kid needs to go to school. Like that was how I felt, right? But my mirroring was, I had to think about what might be going on for them. Oh my gosh, you all are overwhelmed. You probably got tons of emails this morning. I'm sure this is really stressful. I'm trying to offer the mirroring so that I can have a fruitful dialogue, right? In real life, it's about, you know, if you're working, you know, those of you who are clinically trained, it's a lot of what we do, right? We just listen to what people are saying. We're not there as a therapist or clinician to fix it. I remember when I was doing my traineeship, my training hours, my clinical training, you know, the first time I ever had clients, I was terrified. I was like, oh my God, what am I going to say to these people? And my supervisor said, Hala, just mirror them. Just say back to them what they said to you. And I was like, That I can do, right? So for 3 months, basically, I basically would just repeat back to clients what they said to me. They would be like, I'm really depressed. I'd be like, sounds like you're really depressed, like pretty much verbatim. And people would leave sessions like, oh my God, that was so amazing. Like you helped me so much. And I'm like, I literally didn't do anything, right? But what I discovered is folks just want to be listened to, right? Like if you watch conversations or even ones you're in, usually people are just waiting to say their part, right? They're waiting to give you advice or give you their opinion. They're not really listening, right? So that was so powerful for me to just see that people were just being heard without a fear that I was going to give them advice or interpret what they were saying. And that's really what mirroring is, right? Of course, there's situations where we then want to offer maybe some advice or a particular intervention, right? But, and it's funny because my son last night was having some of his anxiety. And I've learned right now, like he just needs me to hold the space, but I couldn't help it. I walked over and I said, honey, maybe just consider doing some of the breathing. He said, Mom, shut up. Don't tell me to breathe. He's like, he didn't need me to tell him how to fix it, right? He just needed, it really sucks. You don't want to go to school and you hate humanities. That's all he needed from me. Like he didn't need a damn breathing exercise, Sometimes they do. Again, I'm not suggesting we're never offering those interventions, but I'm talking about the mirroring sets the stage for that, right? He just wanted me to sit with him in his outrage about humanities, right? He just needed me in there with him for a minute, So, so we can think about our relationships with our children. We can think about students, right? Our clients, where are places where we need to mirror? Sometimes there are places where you're just stuck and you're like, okay, I guess I'm just going to mirror. I'm going to stop trying to do XYZ, stop trying to fix, right? And this can also be true in really extreme situations where people are really, really upset. Like they just need to be heard. This might be showing up in some of your working relationships where maybe there's like some difficulty with collaboration and you just need to really feel more heard. So maybe you're going to offer that listening to that person to feel more heard. So, in a minute, I'm going to invite you, we're going to practice some of these. This is why I want you to brainstorm a little bit. What are some relationships where you can practice mirroring and active listening? So is it with a colleague, student, or client, or with a loved one? It might be other categories that aren't here. So I'm just going to be quiet for a minute or two. And I want you to just write down where are some relationships right now that are maybe feeling a little bit bumpy or there's some challenge. I'm going to start setting us up to practice some of this mirroring. Okay. And if you want, you'll have a chance to opt into some breakouts to try this on, right? Because, we got to build the muscle. We have to try it on and then maybe we can go try it with the real person. Okay. So I'm going to give you a few things. So here are different ways that we can mirror a person, right? We can mirror by repeating back what they just said verbatim, right? We can respond to what we think they meant. So, because sometimes people are not delivering their feelings really skillfully. Like sometimes they're just like, I hate you, right? But maybe behind it sounds like you're really upset, but I didn't XYZ, right? Or it sounds like you feel like what I did was unfair. So sometimes we're trying to listen for what's behind the statement, right? But we're checking in to make sure that that's accurate for them. Okay. So we're trying to reflect what's behind them, or we're asking a clarifying question. Maybe we're not sure. We can say, can you tell me more about that? What it sounds like you're really angry. Can you tell me more about that? Right. So we want to try to stay really curious when we're trying to mirror. And it's really important that we mirror with our tone and our body language, because there's nothing more obnoxious than it sounds like that made you really angry, right? We, especially if you're a clinician, your family or people around are going to be a little hypervigilant to us therapizing them, right? Even our clients, right? It has to be sincere. It has to be oh God, that sounds like it's really overwhelming, right? Even if in your mind, you're like, why would that be overwhelming, right? We don't have to agree, but we want to empathize and we want to have them feel in our tone that we are mirroring them. Okay. Now, is mirroring possible if you're at a fight flight? No, right? If you can't breathe and you're so angry and your blood's boiling, that's when we have to regulate. So let's remember the 4 R's. First, we reflect what's going on for me in this interaction. Then we regulate. All right, I'm gonna take a breath, or I'm gonna feel my feet on the floor. I'm gonna look around, right? Then we offer the mirroring phrases, right? So, I think I sort of elucidated. I think I sort of gave it to you in the email interaction, but in person, it's going to be, it's going to be a little different, because sometimes in person, you can't like step away in the same way. So you're kind of doing it in the moment, right? You're just trying to stay grounded in the moment in order to have the interaction, right? Sometimes you might have to say to somebody, you know what, I'm really triggered right now, and I know that I'm not going to be skillful in communicating. So I need some time and I'll come back. Okay. That's not always possible either, right? I'm going to give you one more example from my personal life. So this was a really fun one. This was a long time ago. This was oh no, not that long, but this was with my husband. We were away at a retreat center where I was teaching back when people did that, before everything was on Zoom. And it was in a place with a really terrible cell signal, and his phone broke, and he was really stressed out because he had a bunch of work he had to do. His computer broke, excuse me. And because there was no cell signal, he couldn't find a solution, right? And, a few weeks before, he thought about hiring an assistant, but we looked at our budget and decided we couldn't afford him having an assistant yet. So here he is, he's really stressed. He can't just call an assistant and say, hey, handle this for me. And he becomes like a 2-year-old. He's so stressed. He's so worried about work. And he says to me, honey, for the next 6 months, I'm going to spend as much money as I can. I'm not going to worry about budget. I'm going to get an assistant, and I'm going to get a new computer. Blah, 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 right? He's completely dysregulated. He's upset, and he's threatening to spend all our money. Okay. Now, this is not a real threat. My husband does not have a history of spending all our money, right? But at first I was like, what are you talking about? Blah, 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 blah. And I was all triggered, right? And I thought, I'm going to take a breath, right? I took a breath and I started mirroring him. And I was like, oh, babe, it's so stressful, and your computer's broken, and you have this important meeting. And he's like, yeah, and I'm like, and if you had an assistant, then you'd be able to do it all, right? Because and he's like, yeah. And I just hung out with him. And within like 15, 20 minutes, he'd really settled, right? Because I just heard him, right? Now, did I agree he should go spend all our money? No. Did I tell him to go hire an assistant? No, right? I didn't agree with him. I just mirrored what I was hearing, right? You don't want to have to worry about money, because when we do, it's more inconvenient and these things happen, right? And then he was able to settle and problem solve, right? If I didn't have these tools, there would be a fight. What do you mean you're going to spend all our money? Did you look at the budget, right? Would that help in the moment? No, he does not need me to tell him about our budget, right? He needs me to just hang out with his emotions, right? Now, look, if this was a person who was violent to me, that's not what I'm going to do, right? So again, there's times where you're setting a boundary and walking away. I want to be really clear that as you're thinking about places for mirroring, that they are appropriate, right? It's not all the time, okay? Pick a scenario that maybe you want to practice, right? Where you can have another person be with you and you can practice. And if you've never done this, I'm going to tell you, this stuff is powerful, because the first time I did this, I was like, this is really weird. I've never, like, people who've done like acting training, like have had these experiences before where so let me backtrack. So you're going to partner with somebody and they're going to be your actor. You're going to tell them their role. So you're going to think of the situation. So if I was going to practice that, I'd say, you're my husband. Here's the story. This just happened. You're very stressed. And here's how you respond. So you tell the actor the role they're going to play. Okay. And then you practice the scenario. Okay. So when you're practicing the scenario, here's the things you're going to do. And this is the thing is, if you're the actor, don't worry about getting it wrong. Weirdly, most people just start to get into it. You start to get into your role. Okay. So when it's your turn to do the exercise, you're going to practice reflection. You start the scene, start to notice what's happening in your body. And I want you to actually stop and name it, right? So actor, you're going to pause as well. So you're going to stop and go, oh, my heart's racing. I'm sweating, right? I want you to name what's happening in your body. I want you to name what you're feeling and what your impulses are. Oh my God, I just want to yell at you right now, right? So you can like stop the tape, name what you're feeling, okay? And then I want you to use your regulation tools. So I want you to practice those, because you're going to have to do those before you practice the mirroring, which is the list of the stuff I gave you. Okay. So you have an actor. So when you're going, you're the person doing the exercise, and then your actor is just going along. You're just acting. You're going to respond to what you hear. So as the actor, if they say things that inflame you, you can let yourself get inflamed, right? If they say things that settle you, you can let yourself get settled, right? So the actor is just going with your flow. You are practicing naming what's happening inside of you and regulating. And then you're going to try to practice the mirroring tools. I don't expect you to solve your problem in this role play. I want you to practice the tools. Okay. Now, there's going to be a third person in the mix, which is the coach, which is just the person who's going to watch the interaction. And the coach, like if you see the person, they're forgetting to breathe or they're forgetting to name what they're feeling, you might remind them. You might say, hey, what are you feeling in your body right now? Right? Or do you want to try some regulation techniques right now? The coach might not do anything. You might just be watching the whole interaction. Okay. But it's also interesting as the coach. Okay. So you'll have the mirror, the person practicing mirroring, you have the actor, and you have the coach. If you want to take a screenshot of this, if it helps you to remember, you can do that. Now, I know we're doing this on Zoom, but I still think it can come to life on Zoom. Okay. And what we'll do is, I'm going to put you into groups for like 20 minutes, and not everybody will have a chance to go. But maybe one or two of you will have a chance to go and do a role play and talk about what you see, right? And try to practice these tools. Okay. Any questions? This is where power comes in, right? Like if you are constantly being microaggressed, I am not suggesting it is your job to mirror the other person, right? And sometimes you might feel like, okay, I can take a breath and I am going to do this for my own self-preservation, right? But I really want to say the onus is not on you, right? It's just so important, because we don't want to, all of these tools, they can be used against impacted communities, right? We have to be so careful, right? Like, to me, if I say something and somebody who's like, who's lived a marginalized life, like screams at me because I did a microaggression, I'm not going to be like, oh, you need to breathe and deliver that with more skill. I actually have to understand the history of that, right? Especially if in that interaction, I come from the privileged culture, I feel like it's my responsibility. I have more breath because I'm not directly impacted, and I did something that harmed somebody, and they're not able to breathe and deliver to me with skill. So I feel like it's my responsibility to not expect that of them, but to still listen to the message. That's that part when we're talking about this anti-oppressive ideology, where we always want to be reflecting also on the power dynamics between us, right? Last short exercise that moves into your own self-care, because the truth is, if we're in constant overwhelm, all of this is going to feel impossible, right? It's going to feel impossible to set the boundaries, to ask for what we want. And so I wanted to make sure that we closed out this series with a final reflection on, all right, what do I need to allow the tool of my body to do all these things that I'm learning, right? What are some of the care things that I can offer? So I just want to throw up, I just have 2 more slides to share with you as reflections for yourself, right? So, in terms of setting your own goals for stress management and building resilience, I want us to invite you to think about it in these categories, right? So in terms of your own body, what are some of your goals for sleep, for food, water, exercise, rest? These are just examples, right? Vitamins, getting touch, right? Nurturing connections, going to see a doctor or going to see a healer, right? I hope you can see that these goals are not meant to be individualistic, right? What are some of your goals for your own mind, your own mental state? Things like meditation and reflection, or therapy, or journaling, or conversations with people, right? What are the things that nurture your spirit? And again, you can see these are not discrete. It's hard to separate them out. Prayer, meditation, art, nature, ritual, music, dancing, being still. How often are we disconnected from technology so we can actually be still? Are we prioritizing having fun? And sometimes what feeds our spirit is supporting others. You all kind of already have that one checked off your list, most of you, right? What are we doing to build resilience in our relationships, right? Do we need to forgive? Do we need to take accountability? Do we need to ask for help? So what I would love is for you to just maybe take a screenshot of this. You will get, you got the slides, but right now, before the workshop ends, I'd love for you to look at these categories, maybe write them down, and write down some things that you think would be important goals for you. Doesn't mean you're going to do them all, but like, do you need to work on your sleep a little bit? Do you need to work on, asking for help more? Do you need to go back to your prayer meditation ritual? Write down these categories and just make a few notes about things that you think would be good for you to strive for. Again, I'm not going to tell you to strive for all of them. You're just going to be invited to make a plan. You're just going to pick one or two things from that list. You're not going to do the whole list, right? Because then you're going to definitely not be able to do it, right? Kind of make a decision how often, when, where, what are some of, what's the new behavior, right? Is it getting into bed a little earlier? Is it, stopping work at X amount of time? Is it turning my phone off, right? And I want you to set some very realistic goals. We talked about this in one of our sessions, like, all right, if you're like, we want to exercise, don't make your goal, I'm going to exercise. If you're like not exercising, don't make your goal, I'm going to exercise an hour, 5 days a week, right? How about I'm going to do 10 minutes, 3 days a week, right? 2 minutes, 5 days a week. Like, set a really small goal for yourself, something that you can accomplish, right? I've had people when they had a goal to go to the gym, to just get to the gym, drive to the gym, and then go home. Like, start small, but consistency. I saw a really great graphic the other day on social media, and it had a staircase, and then it had this like zigzag up and down, and it said, if you're relying on motivation to meet your goals, you're not going to meet them. It has to be consistency, right? So if it's more movement, okay, walk 5 minutes a day, right? For 30 days, right? If some days you do more, that's fine. So can you create very, very attainable goals? Maybe you find an accountability partner. Maybe there's somebody on this call that that you can check in with once a week or once a day. How are you doing with eating more vegetables, right? And I want to say, if you have food goals, I want to suggest you just add foods that you want to be eating more of. Don't try to take away foods. There's no better way to make you want to eat a food than telling you can't eat it, right? So, don't stop the chocolate, just eat more broccoli. And, again, adding positive things can start to crowd out some of those other behaviors. And maybe if you have a very small goal, you start that for a few days, and then you add a second goal. And remember that slow is fast, right? So you're picking one or two very small goals. And I meant to say after 30 days, you add a new one, not after 3 days. Apologies, this slide has a typo, right? Because I think one of the things that often sabotage us is when it's too lofty and it's not doable. It's interesting because I exercise 4 or 5 days a week for 40 minutes, but I've been wanting to increase it to an hour. And what I started noticing was I made the goal an hour and I wouldn't exercise. I actually missed a few days, and I'm pretty consistent. And I was like, I'm just going to add 5 minutes to my exercise. Right. And now I've just added the 5 minutes. Right. I was like, even adding 20 minutes was too much, because an hour felt like too much time. Right. Who has the time? If you want to share by way of just modeling so other people can see what some goals could look like, can you share them into the chat? And these are a few of my favorite resources. So this book by one of my colleagues, Octavia Rahim, called Pause, Rest, Be: Stillness Practices for Courage in Times of Change. Really beautiful, poetic book. I have it by my bed. I want to recommend my book, Peace from Anxiety. And we're going to talk about some of the book club and the coaching sessions. The Book of Joy with the Dalai Lama and Archbishop Desmond Tutu. And Pleasure Activism by Adrienne Marie Brown, one of my favorite writers. And then I also have a monthly membership program that, I want to invite you to join if you'd like, where you get videos from me and yoga practices and talks. And we have community calls. There's lots of folks like you in the community, and it's all offered on sliding scale. So those are just a few simple things I wanted to offer to folks. Thank you. This was a beautiful series. I loved being here with all of you. I hope that it felt useful and fruitful, and you can work on your goals.
And again, thanks to our funder, SAMHSA, for making this possible at no cost.